to this video where we're going to take a look at solving equations by factoring. I have put the note sheet here in the description, so if you want to download a copy of it, you're welcome to do that. I'm going to follow these 3 steps with each of the problems here. First, I'm going to work to get the equation equal to 0. Then I'm going to factor completely, and then I'm going to set each factor equal to 0, and then we'll solve. So let's take a look at this first one here. You'll notice that I don't have the equation equal to 0. That would mean that I would have a 0 on one side and everything else on the other. So what I'm going to do, I like my terms to go on the left. So I'm going to move these 2 terms, the x and the 30, to the left side so that I have all the terms on the left. Now to move the x, I'm going to subtract x from both sides. Be real careful here with this x squared minus x. Since those don't have the same exponent, we can't actually subtract them. So what we do instead is we just write them side by side. Okay, now the x minus x, that goes away and leaves me with 30. Now one more step, we are going to go ahead and get that 30 on the left-hand side. So we're going to subtract 30 from both sides. And that leaves me with x squared minus x minus 30 equals 0. See, all of these terms on the left side, they don't have the same variable and the same exponent, so we cannot actually subtract them. All right, so now we've done step 1, which was to set each equation equal to 0. Our next step is to go ahead and factor this. And so I'm going to use a little organization tool to factor. And I'm going to take the x squared term, and I'm going to put it here. I'm going to take the term without the variable here, and notice I'm putting negative 30 there. And then I'm going to take the middle term, and I'm going to put it here. Now watch my thought process here as I ask myself questions to fill in this organization tool. I ask myself, what times what would give me x squared? Well, that would be x and x. X times x gives me x squared. Then I asked myself, what times what would give me negative 30? Now this is where you have a lot of options, so you're going to have to think ahead. So we're asking ourselves, what would multiply to give us negative 30? But if you take a peek over here, you're trying to find 2 terms that multiply to give you negative 30, but add to give you negative 1 there. See that negative 1 that's understood in front of the x. So if that is a condition, then I know I need to use negative 6 and positive 5. So watch what happens here when we cross multiply. We're going to multiply here. So x times 5 gives me 5x. And we'll multiply here. So x times negative 6 gives me negative 6x. And friends, in order for this to work, those have to add to negative x, which they do. So we're going to take our parentheses here out of the middle. One of our parentheses will be x minus 6. And one of our parentheses will be x plus 5. And now we have accomplished step number 2, which was to factor completely. Step 3 is to set each factor equal to 0. So x minus 6 equals 0. And x plus 5 equals 0. These become pretty easy equations to solve. So I'll add 6 to both sides. That gives me x equals 6. And I'll subtract 5 from both sides, and that gives me x equals negative 5. So friends, my solutions here are x equals 6 or x equals negative 5. So let's keep going. I love to use color in math, so we'll add some there. Let's keep going with our next one here, which is 3x squared minus 8 equals 10x. So we're going to follow the same process, right? We're going to get all the terms on one side of the equation. I like them to go on the left, and I like to do my problems the same way every time. So I'm going to subtract 10x from both sides. Remember, you can't subtract these because they don't have the same variables or the same exponents. And now we're ready to factor because we've got them all equal to 0. So this one's a little bit different because of that 3 there in front of the x squared, but we get to put them in the same places, okay? So I'm going to put the 3x squared here. I'll put the negative 8 there, and then that negative 10x is going to go here. Now, friends, there's no trick to this tool here. It's just an organization tool. So we ask ourselves, what times what would give us 3x squared? That's 3x and x. Now, this one's tricky because, yes, we want two things that multiply to give me negative 8, but you got to think about the cross multiplication that's going to happen here. So I'm going to use 4 and 2, negative 4 and 2. So I got to decide, does the negative 4 go here or does the 2 go here or there? So let me put it in pencil and let's try it. Okay. So if I put the 2 there and the negative 4 there, and I wrote it in pencil so I could easily erase, then look at the cross multiply part. 3 times negative 4 gives me negative 12. Well, that's looking good, right? And then x times 2 give me 2x. So that's what I want. If that doesn't work, if that doesn't add to give you the negative 10, just erase those and flip-flop them so that you can get them. Okay? And so now let's cross multiply. Okay? We kind of did it a little bit in our head, but let's do it official. 3x times negative 4 gives me negative 12x. And x times 2 gives me 2x. And yes, those do add to my negative 10x, so we're good. Now remember, we take our parentheses across the row. So that is 3x plus 2, and this is x minus 4. So then you can set them equal to set it equal to 0. Okay, over here, we're going to subtract 2 from both sides. That leaves me with 3x equals negative 2, and then we'll divide by 3. That gives me negative 2/3. And then over here, we'll add 4 to both sides, and that gives me x equals 4. So my solutions for this one are x equals negative 2/3 and 4. Now, let me let you in on a little secret here. When we have an exponent of 2, then we can have at most 2 solutions. So if you come up with 3 solutions and you have an x squared as your highest exponent, then you've done something wrong and you want to go back and edit. Okay. Let's look at number 3 here. I've got x squared minus 2x equals 0. So this one is, yay for us, already equal to 0. So we're done with step 1. Now we need to factor. Now, I'm not going to use this organization tool for this problem. Here's why. We only have 2 terms. We don't have 3 terms that we could put in the right spots in this tool. Instead, with this one, I'm going to factor by GCF. And you may say, Dr. May, what does that mean? Well, that means I'm going to look at these 2 terms and I'm going to ask, okay, what did they have in common? They both have an x in common. So we're going to factor that out. I'm going to put that x in front. And then I'm going to take and say, okay, x times what would give me x squared? X times what would give me x squared? That would be x. Then I've got a minus. And then x times what would give me 2x? And that would have to be the 2. So now we factored. We just did it by GCF this time. Okay, so now we go to step 3, which is to set each factor equal to 0. So the factors this time, we're going to set this x equal to 0, and we'll set the x minus 2 equal to 0. So x equals 0 is fine. That's a solution. This guy, we need to go ahead and add 2 to both sides. So my solutions here are x equals 0 and x equals 2. So again, we get those 2 solutions. The difference in this example is that we factored by GCF. Okay. All right, one more of this type. And let's take a look at it. We've got 8x plus 24 equals 2x squared. Now, friends, this 2x squared being over here on the right side is causing me a problem. Here's why. I like my x squared terms to be positive. It's a lot easier that way in my tool. However, I'm going to have to move these to the right to do that. So that's okay. We're going to work through it. What I might do, friends, is just flip-flop these. So I will put what's on the right on the left and vice versa. Okay, now I can move my terms to the left side. So let's subtract that 8x. That gives me 2x squared minus 8x equals 24. Then let's move that 24 over. That'll be 2x squared minus 8x minus 24 equals 0. And friends, I noticed that all of these are divisible by 2. Okay, so let's make our problem really simple here by dividing every single term by 2. So if I just divide this guy by 2, I divide this one by 2, this one by 2, and this one. Every single term gets divided by 2. Then I'll have x squared minus 4x minus 6 equals 0. And that became a lot simpler. I'm dealing with smaller numbers. And oops, you know what? That's not 6, that's 12. Thank you for catching that. And now it'll make it really a lot simpler when I go to my tool because I'm dealing with smaller numbers. So let's make our little organization tool here. We'll put our x squared here, our minus 12 there, and our negative 4x here. Okay. So again, ask yourself, what times what would give you x squared? Well, that's x and x. What times what would give you negative 12, but eyes ahead, think about it has to add to give you negative 4. So you've got lots of combinations here, but the 6 and 2 combination is the one that's going to add to give me negative 4 if I make the 6 negative there. Okay, so let's do our cross multiplying. Okay, x times negative 6 gives me negative 6x, and x times 2 gives me 2x. That's how they add to negative 4. So we'll get our parentheses from the rows. That gives me x minus 6 and x plus 2, and that equals 0. Now set both of those equal to 0, and we can solve. So that gives me x equals 6 here, and minus 2 gives me x equals negative 2 right there. All right, so my solutions here are x equals negative 2 and 6. And those are the examples I have when the terms will factor, is what this technique is called. So then the question comes, well, what if they don't factor? What if I can't come up with two numbers that are going to multiply to give me 12, but are going to add to give me negative 4x? Well, then we have to use something called the quadratic formula. And let me share that with you. Again, all of these note pages are there in the description. So if you want to download a copy to follow along, you are more than welcome to do that. This guy right here is called the quadratic formula, and it's a beast. I understand. However, I want you to add it to your notes so you have it. I also want you to notice how you get A, B, and C values. Notice that the equation has to be equal to 0, and then A is the number in front of x squared, B is the number in front of x, and C is the number by itself. But that equation has to be equal to 0 before you can do anything. So let's look at number 1 here. Got to get that equation equal to 0. So just like we did with the factoring, I'm going to subtract the 4x. And that gives me my x squared minus 4x minus 12. We've already talked about how that we can't add those because they're not like terms. So let's figure out what A, B, and C are. Well, A I know is this number in front of x squared, but there's not one written. So that is understood to be 1. B is a number in front of x. Be sure and take the negative with it. And C, again, you want the negative to go with it. So there are my values, and I'm going to substitute them into my formula here. All right, here goes. So I got x equals negative b. So that means if b is negative, you're going to change the sign on it. So negative negative 4 gives me positive 4. Let me write it out for my notes for the first time. Plus or minus. I'll show you how we handle that here in just a moment. Then I've got this square root I'm going to open up. I've got negative 4 to the second power. Notice I put it in parentheses. Minus 4 times A is 1 times C is negative 12. And then let me draw that little square root there. And then all divided by 2 times A, or 2 times 1. Okay, so now it's some simplifying. Now that we've done our substitutions, let's simplify. Negative negative 4 would be positive 4. plus or minus. Then I've got my square root. Negative 4 squared is 16 minus 4 times 1 is 4 times negative 12 is negative 48. So friends, that's a minus negative. And then on the bottom, 2 times 1 is 2. Okay. Keep simplifying underneath that square root. I'm going to change that subtraction to an addition. I can only do that if I change the sign of the very next number. And so I have x equals 4 plus or minus. Now under my square root, 16 plus 48 is 64 divided by 2. All right, now we got lucky on this one. This doesn't happen very often, but we got a perfect square root because we know that the square root of 64 is 8. So look at what we have. We have x equals 4 plus 8 divided by 2. X equals 4 plus 8 divided by 2. Or x equals 4 minus 8 divided by 2. Okay, so we'll do that. 4 plus 8 gives me 12. 12 divided by 2 gives me 6. And over here, 4 minus 8 gives me negative 4. Negative 4 divided by 2 gives me negative 2. So we get that x equals negative 2 and 6. Now, friends, we just did this problem when we were factoring and we got these same answers. But I always like my first one with quadratic formula where the answers come out nice because it doesn't happen very often. So I do want you to see one where it's nice. Okay, so let's do another one. Let's do this number 2 here. Good for us. It's already set equal to 0. So we can easily start by identifying a, b, and c. So a is 5, it's that number in front of x squared. B is negative 4, and c equals negative 2. All right, let's put them in our formula. We'll start with x equals negative b. Remember that's negative 4 plus or minus. Then I've got negative 4 squared minus 4 times a, which is 5, times c, which is negative 2. There we go. All divided by 2 times a, or 2 times 5 here. Okay, let's clean it up, or what I mean by that is to simplify. So negative 4 is 4 plus or minus. Then I've got negative 4 squared is 16 minus 4 times 5 is 20. 20 times negative 2 is negative 40. Watch that. Remember, it is a minus negative. And then divided by 2 times 5 is 10. All right, so that gives me 4 plus or minus, working underneath that square root, just like we did before. We're going to change that minus to a plus only by changing the sign of the very next number. And that gives me square root of 56. All right, now square root of 56 is not a perfect square. So we don't get to just make it a nice number, but what we are going to do is to go ahead and simplify this square root of 56. What do I mean by that? Well, the square root of 56, 56 really is 4 times 14. Since 4 is a perfect square, I can take the square root of it. So square root of 4 is 2. But the 14 is not a perfect square, so it has to stay underneath the square root. Okay, so it becomes 4 plus or minus now 2 square root of 14 divided by 10. Now, I'm going to go ahead, notice the 4, the 2, and the 10. The 14 is kind of protected by the square root, so I can't work with it. But 4, 2, and 10 are all divisible by 2. So I'm going to get 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Can't touch the square root of 14 because it's protected. And then the 10 divided by 2 is 5. So I know that x equals 2 plus or minus the square root of 14 divided by 5. If I wanted decimals for this, I would go to my calculator. I would type in 2 plus the square root of 14 divided by 5. And I would type in 2 minus the square root of 14 divided by 5. This is if my answer or my instructions want decimals, that's what I would do. If my instructions want exact answers, there they are. I'm going to leave it just like that. So I hope this helps you with quadratics, both with factoring and then when factoring doesn't work and we have to go with the quadratic formula.